The woods of Benton County stood silent that winter night, cold, still, and hiding something unspeakable. On December 20th, 2020, the silence broke with a single phone call. A man's voice came through, calm to the point of being chilling. "My daughter is dead," he said. His name was James Mast. When police reached the remote home tucked deep in the Missouri forest, they stepped into a nightmare that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Sheriff Eric Knox, a veteran of countless crime scenes, later said it was the most horrifying case he had ever witnessed. Even hardened investigators walked out of the house in tears.
One of the worst cases, actually the worst case any of us have ever seen.
Upstairs, in a small bedroom painted for a child, lay a tiny body under a pink blanket. So innocent, so heartbreakingly small. 4-year-old JessicaMast. Her eyes were open wide, frozen in an expression of pure terror. From her neck down to her feet, her skin was a map of agony. Dark bruises in every shade of purple and green, ruptured blisters, open wounds. Distinct belt marks, so precise that a forensic pathologist would later call them the signature of her torturers. And behind those bruises, investigators would soon uncover something even darker: the unspeakable sexual abuse the child endured in her final hours. This is the story of a little girl who lived her last weeks in fear and pain, and of the adults who convinced themselves they were saving her soul while destroying her body. For weeks, 4 adults, Jessica's own parents and their neighbors, tortured the child under the guise of casting out demons. They invented new ways to make her suffer, beat her, submerged her in icy water, and broke her spirit piece by piece. Her parents, terrified and brainwashed, became accomplices to their own daughter's murder. No one stopped. No one called for help. Before we go deeper into this devastating case, remember, every time these stories are shared, awareness grows, and another innocent life might be saved. Let the world know that you stand for protecting children who cannot protect themselves. Jessica lived with her parents, James and Mary Mast, and her 2 younger brothers, 2-year-old Nathaniel and 11-month-old Justin, in a quiet part of rural Missouri. Their home sat miles from town, surrounded by the dense woods of Benton County, not far from Lincoln and Cole Camp. The Mast family belonged to a conservative Anabaptist religious community known for strict, isolated lifestyles. Their home was the only one along that stretch of road. Other neighbors lived far away, a distance that would soon allow horror to unfold unseen. Around 1 a.m. on December 20th, James Mast finally called 911 to report his daughter's death. When deputies arrived, the 28-year-old father sat blankly in the living room, expressionless. When asked where the child was, he quietly said, "Upstairs." In the nursery, officers found Jessica's body, cold, motionless, her eyes staring into nothing. When they lifted the blanket, what they saw left them speechless. The little girl's body was covered in layers of bruises and blistered welts from repeated beatings. It was difficult to comprehend how anyone could inflict such pain on a child. When questioned, James Mast gave a fragmented, almost detached account of what had happened the day before. According to him, on December 19th, his neighbors, 35-year-old Ethan Mast, no relation, and 21-year-old Courtney Allman, had come to the house to cast demons out of his children. The ritual ended with Jessica's death. In another bedroom, officers found 29-year-old Mary Mast, bruised and shaking, clutching baby Justin in her arms. The infant was unharmed, but 2-year-old Nathaniel in the next room showed clear signs of being beaten. Mary and Nathaniel were rushed to a hospital in Sedalia, and the baby was taken into protective custody. Later, investigators pieced together the terrifying timeline. Around 8 a.m. on December 19th, Ethan Mast and Courtney Allman arrived to begin what they called a purification. The children, seeing them enter, panicked. They already knew what that meant. The house had security cameras, but Courtney quickly pulled out her phone, entered the passcode, and turned them off. They began by disciplining little Nathaniel, forcing him to lie still while they whipped him with a belt. Then they left, only to return around 5 p.m. to target Jessica, The terrified girl tried to run to her parents for help, but they didn't protect her. James Mast even handed the neighbors his own belt, later claiming he was afraid of being punished for helping demons. The neighbors insisted the child was possessed by evil and that pain would cleanse her.
The only thing we have is what they're telling us, and they were doing it in the name of discipline. Disciplining the family was their quote. There's a huge difference between discipline and beating. One or more of them were fanatics. Like I put in my Facebook post, this is an isolated incident. Some people tried to say that this was the cult because they used the word demon, and obviously demon and God in the same sentence, would cause speculation for imaginations to run wild. But there's no evidence of anything other than this family and basically two families.
Mary Mast told police she and her husband were too frightened to resist, that if they intervened, they might be shot or condemned to hell. By evening, both parents were also beaten. Then came the unthinkable. The neighbors forced the parents to commit degrading acts against their own daughter. Afterward, they ordered Mary to take Jessica outside, strip her, and submerge her in the icy pond behind the house, a so-called baptism meant to drive out evil. Courtney forced Mary into the freezing water too, as part of the ritual. When they brought Jessica back inside, they continued to whip her until she stopped reacting. The girl no longer cried. She seemed to know it was useless. Eventually, exhausted, they told James Mast to take his daughter upstairs and put her to bed. He didn't dress her. He didn't cover her. Around 7:30 p.m., Mary asked permission to check on Jessica, but the neighbors refused. Only later, when the house was silent, did the parents sneak upstairs to find their daughter motionless. They covered her with a blanket, but she was already gone. When asked why he hadn't called earlier, James said he only realized she was dead hours later. But investigators knew that both parents had many chances to seek help and chose not to. James Mast also claimed that Ethan Mast and Courtney Allman had recorded Mary beating their son for blackmail, though Mary admitted the truth, that for the past 2 weeks, the children had been repeatedly beaten with belts and sticks, and that she herself was regularly attacked. The neighbors believed Mary was possessed too, and needed to be purified. When deputies crossed the road to arrest Ethan Mast and Courtney Allman, new layers of darkness surfaced. Ethan's father was a preacher in their church. Courtney had come from Pennsylvania, where she'd spent 3 years in a psychiatric facility, though she had no prior criminal record. After moving to Missouri, she joined the same Anabaptist congregation, and the church elders had bizarrely assigned James Mast to act as her spiritual mentor. As investigators dug deeper into the lives of those involved, a disturbing web of manipulation, control, and twisted relationships began to unravel. At the center of it was James Mast, Jessica's father. At some point, James began an affair with Courtney Allman, the same woman who would later become one of Jessica's abusers. Despite being married with children, James moved Courtney into the family home. He continued living with both women under one roof, sharing a bed with each of them. And Mary, Jessica's mother, was forced to tolerate the humiliation. In their strict Anabaptist faith, obedience to the husband was demanded, no matter how degrading. Eventually, Mary became pregnant again. And rather than supporting her, James left with Courtney to live in a separate summer home during her final weeks of pregnancy, without even telling Mary where they were. After the child was born, James returned with Courtney. Mary begged him to send her away, and James finally did, around November 1st. But Courtney wasn't gone for long. Angry and bitter, she moved across the road to live with Ethan Mast, a man who was not related to James or Mary, despite sharing the same last name. Soon, she became involved with both men. What followed would become one of the most shocking and tragic cases Missouri had ever seen. On December 20th, 2020, prosecutors filed charges against Ethan Mast and Courtney Allman: second-degree murder, 3 counts of first-degree assault, and felony sexual abuse. Later, Ethan would be charged with first-degree murder. Jessica's parents, James and Mary, were arrested on December 24th. The charges against them included endangering the welfare of a child and domestic assault. Eventually, additional charges, including murder, were added. They were not allowed to attend their daughter's funeral. The first court appearance took place on January 5, 2021. It was a day that revealed just how complex and horrifying the case had become. Only 3 of the defendants were present. Ethan was absent, lacking legal representation. Courtney, however, appeared with 3 defense attorneys, all hired by her parents, who had traveled from Pennsylvania to support her. Her family insisted she was a good person, young, from a respectable home, with no prior criminal history. But what stood out the most that day was Mary Mast's behavior. Smiling in the courtroom, she looked disconnected from the reality that she was on trial for her daughter's murder. The Benton County community was devastated. 2 vigils were held in Jessica's memory, one in late December, and a second on January 5th outside the courthouse. Locals demanded justice. A petition with over 2,400 signatures called for a special prosecutor, arguing that the original charges were far too lenient.
The community has very strong feelings about this case, as well as law enforcement. It's very personal to us when a baby gets killed.
Despite the overwhelming evidence, both James and Mary continued to deny any responsibility. They were released on $500,000 bail and fitted with GPS monitors. Their surviving sons were placed in foster care with a family that expressed interest in adopting them. Eventually, the boys were sent to live with their biological grandparents. The court forbade James and Mary from having any contact with their children.
The Masts were very upset because they had no knowledge that their bonds were revoked. But as far as the folks in the courtroom, unfortunately for the Masts, were elated.
In February 2022, Ethan Mast agreed to a plea deal. He admitted guilt in exchange for reduced charges, second-degree murder, carrying a sentence of up to 30 years, with eligibility for parole after just 10. During questioning, Ethan blamed Courtney, claiming she had orchestrated everything. According to him, she manipulated everyone involved and drove the abuse. On January 4, 2023, Mary Mast also entered a guilty plea, this time to first-degree child endangerment. In exchange, prosecutors dropped 7 other charges on the condition that she testify against Ethan and Courtney. Prosecutors recommended a 5-year sentence, but the case remains open. Final verdicts have not yet been handed down. Courtney's fate still hangs in the balance. While her defense attorneys attempt to portray her as innocent, the other defendants consistently describe her as the mastermind. They claim Courtney was the initiator, the one who insisted they visit the Mast household to torment the children and their parents. It became clear that Ethan and Courtney, emboldened by a sense of power and control, had begun to enjoy the cruelty. They believed they were untouchable. Their actions were no longer about religion or demons. They were about domination. James Mast's trial is also ongoing. For many, he remains one of the most disturbing figures in the case, not just for his actions, but for his complete emotional detachment. According to the police report by Sergeant Chris Wilson, James showed no emotion at the scene. Sheriff Eric Knox later said that even the most hardened officers left the house in tears. But Jessica's father, he remained cold, distant, and calm, as if nothing had happened. The autopsy revealed a devastating truth. JessicaMast died of hypothermia. Despite the days of torture, the beatings, the freezing water, her final cause of death wasn't trauma, it was the cold. This means one unbearable thing. She could have been saved.
She was literally beaten to death, according to the autopsy. She was dunked in ice cold water in a pond and then put up in a room by herself, and she passed sometime shortly after that. There were allegedly 4 people involved, and now all 4 people are back in custody.
Now, you could have easily put the cause of death as hypothermia, could you not?
I could have, but there was also multiple blunt force injuries.
I understand that. But this is the subjectiveness that comes into play, correct?
She had been placed, naked and bruised, on her bed by her father, and left alone. While her parents and younger brothers remained in the same house, Jessica spent her final hours in isolation, slipping away in silence. At some point, James returned to check on her. He found her lifeless body on the floor near the bed. And then, in a calm, emotionless voice, he finally called 911. He would later claim he feared being watched by Ethan and Courtney through the cameras, that he believed they would punish him if he intervened. But the logic collapses under the weight of its own cowardice. He called the police anyway. And if he could have done it then, he could have done it sooner. Jessica Mast was 4 years old, a child who didn't yet know what rules were. Her entire world revolved around her parents, her protectors. When the pain became too much, she tried to flee, crying out for help from the people she trusted most. And they stood by. They watched. They handed over belts and turned their backs. When investigators later questioned James Mast, he lifted his shirt and pointed to bruises on his body from being beaten with a spoon, trying to prove his own fear. But those marks didn't speak as loudly as the silence he chose when his daughter screamed. Nearly 4 years after her death, on November 25, 2024, James Mast pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and first-degree assault. As part of the plea agreement, 6 other charges were dismissed in exchange for full cooperation. Prosecutors recommended 2 life sentences to be served concurrently. Courtney Ammon, meanwhile, was ruled mentally unfit to stand trial. As of October 2025, she remains in a state-run mental health facility in Missouri under court-ordered commitment. Her trial was transferred to Webster County and is scheduled for May 11th through 15th, 2026. Until her case is resolved and she is deemed competent, none of the defendants will be sentenced. Today, James, Mary, and Ethan remain behind bars in Benton County Jail, awaiting the final chapter of this long and painful case. Each day that passes, the community waits for justice. Justice that has been years in the making. But even as the legal system moves slowly forward, the memory of Jessica lingers. Her death was not just the result of violence, it was the culmination of failure at every level. Family, community, faith, and fear. This case shines a brutal light on the dangers that can grow unchecked in isolated religious communities, on the harm that can be disguised as faith, and on the blind obedience that allows evil to flourish behind closed doors. If anything is to come from Jessica's suffering, it must be this: more vigilant oversight of children in at-risk households, especially in closed or extremist communities. Law enforcement, social services, and neighbors must remain alert, proactive, and involved. Children's lives depend on it.
This is our home. Our families live here. A lot of us grew up here. So anytime something like this happens or any significant crime, it's personal to us because this is our home.
Perhaps it's time to revisit our laws, to consider whether any form of corporal punishment should be legal in modern society, even by a parent's hand. What we allow behind closed doors becomes the standard for what we tolerate as a society. And while this case involves religion, it is not an indictment of faith, but of those who twist it. True belief does not lead to brutality. Real faith does not demand silence in the face of suffering. And no one, no doctrine, no leader, no ritual, has the right to demand a child's life as a sacrifice. In May 2026, more than 5 years after she died, the final trial may bring this case to an end. But no sentence, no number of years or guilty verdicts can return what was lost. Jessica Mast was 4 years old. She deserved safety, warmth, joy, a chance to grow. Instead, she was betrayed by the very people she trusted most. And for that, the world must never forget her name. Rest in peace, little angel. You mattered. You were loved. And we will not stay silent. If this story moved you, please share it. Help raise awareness. And remember, behind every closed door, a child might be waiting for someone to notice. Let that someone be you. When a judge who has witnessed the worst of humanity calls a crime utterly depraved, you know it's something truly monstrous. And at the center of this case stands a woman who embodies that darkness, a person trusted with the most sacred responsibility. Caring for a helpless child became the very nightmare no one saw coming. Anthony Delgado was only 17 months old, a child just beginning to explore the world. His laughter filled rooms, his tiny steps wobbled with excitement, and his wide eyes held nothing but curiosity. At that age, trust is unconditional. His mother, his family, and those around him were his entire world. But that trust was about to be shattered in a way too horrific to imagine. Gloria Fields wasn't a stranger. She was a neighbor, someone Anthony's mother, Marta, believed she could rely on. It was just a simple favor, a weekend of babysitting while Marta moved apartments. What could possibly go wrong? But on the night of February 21st, 2016, Anthony's world came to a violent, unforgiving halt. What started as a harmless arrangement turned into something unspeakable. Gloria Fields, the very person entrusted with his safety, became his tormentor. Instead of protecting him, she inflicted pain beyond comprehension. The lies started early. A simple text from Gloria to Marta. Anthony had fallen. But behind closed doors, something far worse was happening. What kind of horror had this defenseless child endured? What level of cruelty had been unleashed on him by someone so trusted? This wasn't an accident. This was days of suffering, neglect, and unimaginable abuse. And when the truth finally came out, an entire community was left in shock, unable to comprehend the depth of this tragedy. The brutal truth behind Gloria Fields' actions was about to be exposed, revealing the darkness lurking beneath a carefully crafted facade of trust. But before we dive in, I want to take a moment to thank you, my incredible viewers and subscribers, for your continued support. Your likes, shares, and comments make these stories even more meaningful. And if you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts. Now, let's get started. Marta had just moved into a new apartment, hoping for a fresh start. A new chapter for her and her son, Anthony. The weight of the past still pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she was determined to make things work, to give Anthony the stable, loving life he deserved. What she didn't know was that sometimes, the people you trust the most are the ones who can hurt you the worst. That's where Gloria Fields came in. She wasn't a stranger. She was a neighbor, seemingly kind, always ready with a smile and a helping hand. When she offered to watch Anthony while Marta settled into their new place, it felt like an innocent favor. What could go wrong? Gloria lived right next door. She seemed like the type of person who would step up in a time of need. Marta never thought to question it. But the truth about Gloria Fields was far darker than she could have ever imagined. Gloria had a past that, in hindsight, should have set off every alarm. She had been arrested 9 times, and not for minor offenses. Her record included charges ranging from substance abuse to assault. Her life had been a cycle of chaos, instability, and reckless choices that had cost her everything, including her own children. She had lost custody due to neglect. A mother who had already failed her own children was now trusted to care for Marta's son, and soon, Marta would realize just how devastating that mistake was. The truth about Gloria Fields was about to come to light, shattering the fragile trust Marta had placed in her. But by then, it would be too late. The damage had already been done, and the consequences would ripple through Marta's life and Anthony's forever. As we'll soon see, some decisions cannot be undone. February 19th, 2016, Anthony, just 6 years old, was left in Gloria Fields' care. By February 20th, things had already begun to spiral. Gloria didn't spend the day taking care of Anthony. Instead, She dragged him along on a day clouded by substance abuse. She smoked marijuana, used other drugs, and made reckless choices no responsible adult should ever make, especially when entrusted with a child's safety. Her judgment was impaired, and the consequences of that day would haunt both her and Anthony forever. Later, Gloria took Anthony to Buffalo Exchange, a second-hand clothing store. As they walked through the aisles, bystanders noticed something deeply unsettling: bruises, marks, visible signs of abuse covering Anthony's small body. Yet no one stepped in. People saw. People looked. But no one acted. By the time Marta received a text from Gloria on February 21st, a casual claim that Anthony had fallen, the damage had already been done. But Anthony hadn't just fallen. He had been tortured. His body bore the evidence of a weekend that had turned into a waking nightmare. 2 days of relentless abuse. 2 days of suffering at the hands of the very person meant to protect him. This wasn't just physical abuse. It was something far worse. Gloria Fields unleashed a violent fury upon a helpless child, shaking him with such force that his tiny frame twisted under the aggression. The blunt force trauma to his head alone was enough to leave him in critical condition. But then it escalated to something so unspeakable, so bone-chilling, that even imagining it is unbearable. Gloria used a pencil to commit the most horrific violation imaginable, inflicting severe internal injuries on Anthony. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a loss of control. This was deliberate. This was calculated cruelty. For 2 long days, Anthony lived in pure terror, trapped in an unending cycle of pain and suffering. It wasn't a single act of violence. It was a pattern, an escalation, a storm that built with each passing hour as Gloria took out her rage on an innocent child. And when she finally realized that Anthony's life was slipping away, when it was too late to undo what she had done, she picked up the phone and called 911. Emergency services responded to the frantic call. The paramedics moved quickly, their urgency undeniable, but the moment they arrived, they knew. Something was terribly wrong. Anthony's tiny body was already beyond saving. The scene was chaotic. But amidst the panic, one thing stood out: Gloria Fields. She wasn't the picture of a concerned, desperate guardian. She wasn't crying, wasn't frantic, wasn't begging for help. Instead, she was cold, detached. Almost as if the reality of what had just happened hadn't fully registered, or worse, as if it didn't matter. Paramedics worked tirelessly, trying to stabilize Anthony as they rushed him to Staten Island University Hospital. Every second counted. Every moment felt like it was slipping away. But by the time they arrived, it was already too late. His small, fragile heart, once so full of life, so full of promise, had given out. Cardiac arrest was listed as the official cause of death. On paper, it seemed like a tragic, almost clinical explanation. But what the medical examiner would uncover in the following days revealed something far darker. The autopsy results sent shockwaves through the medical staff. Bruises, broken bones, the unmistakable signs of prolonged, brutal force. This wasn't a child who had simply fallen. This was a child who had been systematically tortured. Anthony had been shaken with such force that it left him with severe blunt force trauma to the head. His injuries weren't just external. They were deep, penetrating, devastating. And in a case like this, where the victim is so young, so helpless, there was only one person investigators would turn to. The one person who had been with Anthony when he was hurt. The one person who had countless chances to stop, but didn't. Gloria Fields. At first, she clung to her lies. She played the victim. She claimed she was off her meds, that she blacked out. Excuses. Anything to shift the blame. Anything to distance herself from the truth of what she had done. But the police weren't letting go. 40 hours of questioning. 40 hours of pressure, of confrontation, of forcing her to face the nightmare she had created. 40 hours of knowing she had killed a child. And then, she cracked. Gloria finally broke, but not in a moment of guilt, not in an outburst of remorse. Her confession spilled out, flat and emotionless. I just wanted to inflict some pain on something else because I was in pain. As if it were logical. As if it made sense. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for forgiveness. She wasn't sorry. Gloria Fields, in that moment, laid bare the twisted justification behind her actions. She didn't want to face her own pain, so she took it out on someone weaker, someone who couldn't fight back, someone like Anthony. As Gloria Fields sat in that courtroom, the weight of her actions hanging over her like a dark cloud, it was clear that this was no ordinary case, no ordinary crime. And yet, there she was, stoic, cold, and silent, refusing to acknowledge the depth of the pain she had caused. As Anthony's family took the stand, their words echoed with the unbearable weight of an unthinkable loss, a loss that could never be undone. The room was thick with grief, but Gloria remained unmoved. Her eyes stared blankly ahead, offering no sign of remorse, no acknowledgement of the devastation she had unleashed. The charges she faced were beyond chilling. First-degree murder, aggravated assault, child endangerment, criminal weapon possession. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no escaping the horrific details of the crime. Anthony's tiny body had been ravaged beyond recognition, and now the world was forced to look at the result of her monstrous actions. But as the trial unfolded, Gloria's defense team grasped at anything to avoid the consequences of her cruelty. At one point, they entertained the idea of an insanity plea. They suggested that her drug use at the time impaired her judgment, making her actions a result of temporary madness. But even that flimsy defense was abandoned almost as quickly as it had been proposed. It was clear to everyone watching that Gloria's actions were not the result of a momentary lapse in judgment. They weren't impulsive. They weren't driven by some uncontrollable outburst. When that defense failed, they tried another approach. They argued that the police had mistreated Gloria during the 40-hour interrogation. They claimed she had been coerced into confessing, that her confession wasn't voluntary. But that defense, too, crumbled. The judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was clear, and there was no indication that Gloria had been manipulated. She had confessed after 40 hours of questioning, but nothing in her statement suggested she had been forced to tell the truth. It was simply the truth spilling out. Her truth. As the judge read out her sentence, Gloria sat there in silence. 23 years to life in prison. A sentence that, for many, felt far too lenient for the monstrous acts she had committed. The room was filled with tension. On one side, Anthony's family, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, grief, and frustration. After the sentencing, one of Anthony's relatives, his aunt, spoke to the media. 23 years to life doesn't bring my nephew back. It doesn't give us the closure we need. But at least we know she'll never hurt another child again. But even in their relief, there was frustration. Frustration that the justice system had failed to deliver the closure they so desperately sought. The sentence, they felt, wasn't enough. It was a reminder that Anthony's life was treated as less important than it should have been. The psychological scars left on Anthony's family would never heal. One of Anthony's cousins spoke with raw emotion. She took everything from us. We're left picking up the pieces, and 23 years doesn't change that. I don't care what she's been through in her life. There's no reason to hurt a child like that. The family's sense of justice was clouded by the undeniable loss they would carry with them forever. Gloria's sentence, though offering some degree of justice, was no balm for the pain. The thought that, in the eyes of the law, she would one day be given a chance to walk free again made it almost impossible for the family to find peace. Their lives would forever be haunted by the brutality of Anthony's death. No amount of time behind bars could ever truly erase the trauma they endured. As the trial unfolded, Gloria's defense team painted the picture of a broken woman, one who had suffered too much, who had reacted to a life filled with pain. But no amount of suffering could ever justify what she had done to Anthony. It was revealed that Gloria had lost custody of her children, a devastating blow that seemed to ignite something dark within her. While her emotional pain might have been real, and no one could fully understand the depth of her suffering, it could never justify the cruelty she unleashed on Anthony. Anthony, who had done nothing to deserve the violence forced upon him, was an innocent victim, and the law would ensure that she paid for her actions. Though losing custody may have partially explained her rage and sorrow, it could never excuse what she did. In the end, it wasn't about her pain. It was about the deliberate, devastating cruelty she inflicted upon Anthony. As Gloria sat in the courtroom presenting her defense, she failed to understand one simple truth. There is no excuse for the abuse of a child. Neighbors who lived near Gloria Fields had much to say about her, much of which pointed to a history of instability and problematic behavior. Many, especially those who had seen her interact with children, described her as unpredictable and volatile. They knew of her criminal history, including arrests and issues with substance abuse. Some neighbors had witnessed strange behavior or tension in the household, though few felt they could intervene in a meaningful way. One neighbor, speaking to the media after Anthony's death, expressed disbelief that someone from their tight-knit community could commit such cruelty. We all saw Gloria as a bit of a loner, but nobody thought she would hurt a child. She talked a lot about her struggles, but we never imagined it would go this far, the neighbor said. She seemed like she was trying to get her life together, but then something just snapped. Others who knew Gloria from the neighborhood described how she was sometimes seen with her children, but their relationships were strained. She used to have her kids over, but they were rarely happy when they were with her, one neighbor said. You could tell they were scared. It wasn't normal, but we didn't think she'd do something like this. Not like that. It's just terrifying, another neighbor commented. There needs to be a better system of awareness for people with a history of abuse, so no one else becomes a victim. Gloria Fields' actions were far from isolated. Studies show that individuals with a history of abuse and neglect, particularly those struggling with substance abuse, are at a significantly higher risk of repeating harmful behaviors. Research by the National Institute of Justice reveals that 68 to 80% of those involved in child abuse or domestic violence are more likely to reoffend, particularly when they also grapple with substance abuse. The National Institute on Drug Abuse further emphasizes this, reporting that 40 to 80% of individuals with a history of child abuse also battle substance abuse issues. The connection between drugs, alcohol, and violence is undeniable, and it becomes even more dangerous when combined with untreated mental health disorders. According to the American Psychological Association, individuals with conditions like depression, personality disorders, and PTSD, common among perpetrators of abuse, are at a higher risk of engaging in violent behavior. This adds another layer of complexity to Gloria's case. Without proper intervention or rehabilitation, individuals like her, struggling with untreated substance abuse and mental health issues, are more likely to continue perpetuating violence, especially when children are involved. In fact, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 70% of offenders convicted of violent crimes, such as abuse, are likely to reoffend within 5 years if they do not receive the proper treatment. This statistic is a chilling reminder of the potential for repeated harm in cases like Gloria's. So let me ask you, was Gloria Fields a product of her own pain and brokenness, or did she consciously choose to inflict harm on an innocent child? Could she have been saved from herself, or was she too far gone? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. Do you think justice was served? Was 23 years to life enough? If you believe these stories need to be heard, if you want to help shed light on the truth, please subscribe to the channel. Your support makes all the difference and ensures we can continue telling the stories that matter. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Together, we can ensure the victims' voices are never silenced. Thank you for being here, and until next time, take care.